Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cedar Rose, and I'm the State Assessment Director with the Office of Public Instruction. I'm really excited to see so many people here on a Tuesday afternoon, especially when I know that some of you are potentially on summer break or on your last week of school, or maybe even on your last day of school. But this is a long-awaited webinar to introduce you all to the DLM assessment, which will be our statewide assessment for alternate math, science, and ELA going into the 25-26 school year. Some of you may have been on some earlier sessions when we were exploring DLM as a possible assessment model for this upcoming year and have heard some of those things, but as we have officially adopted DLM, we wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to share some information about DLM going into the summer months for you all to have more information going into this upcoming school year. As we go into the summer months and learn more about DLM and have more of those resources, we will be providing that out in front of our next administration year. But I wanted to make sure that we provided that opportunity now so we have a little bit more information for us all. The structure of this webinar is we will have about 30 minutes for the DLM team to share an overview of the assessment, and then we will open it up to questions. If you do have questions that come up while Tammy is presenting, feel free to drop those in the chat. We won't answer those right away. But I know as those come up, sometimes it's hard to hold on to them. Then after Tammy presents, we will open that up for any questions you may have. This webinar will be recorded and posted on our assessment webpage, so you can go back and reference it, as well as any of the resources that we referenced today. So with that, I will hand it over to Tammy with DLM to provide an introduction to our DLM assessment. Go ahead, Tammy.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on this, fine day in North Dakota. I am Tammy Meyer. I am the Montana Program Manager for the DLM assessment, and we are connected with the University of Kansas, but we're a distributed workforce, and so I am located right in North Dakota, your neighboring state. So I'm excited to get to know all of you through this journey. I'm going to give just a very high level overview for those of you, like Cedar had mentioned, you may have heard some of the information already, so it might sound familiar. And for a lot of you, it might be very new information. I'm going to talk rather rapidly, which is not abnormal for me to talk really fast. But I want to get through kind of the essence of what the system is going to look like to give you a full view and a full picture of what it's like. So you have that idea just kind of in your minds, and then assure you that coming fall and closer to school starting, there'll be lots of information we'll give you for a smooth transition, and you'll feel very comfortable with this assessment as your assessment window is open. So it'll be easy. It'll be a good, hopefully rewarding process for you. I'm going to share my screen. I don't know if you've made this available yet, but I do know that this presentation is going to be made available, right, Cedar? Yes. Okay. So, like I said, I'm going to go through some of this rather quickly. There's going to be some links and some different things that you'll be able to look at and reference later. I might not go through all of those just because of time, but wanted you to have reference so you could review on your own if you need to. So, looking forward to getting started here. We're going to use a lot of lingo when we're talking about DLM assessments, and you know, like with everything new, there's just so much terminology. So I just wanted to do a quick review of some of the terms that I'll be using in this presentation and that you'll hear often and probably see a lot in much of the resources. So when you hear me talk about testlets, that is the short assessment that you're going to give the students, is what's made up of the DLM assessment. Essential elements, you're going to hear a lot of that if you're not already familiar with some of the essential elements, but those are basically the alternate achievement standards. the alternate achievement standards that are based on grade level gen ed standards. And so that's what we base a lot of our testlets on. We're going to talk about linkage levels, and that is skills that of varying difficulty or complexity for each essential element. So each testlet is developed from an essential element, and the essential element then is broke down into different complexity levels per essential element. And then the last three terms I'm going to review are KITE, Educator Portal, and Student Portal. And again, this is just the platform where the DLM assessments are hosted for the KITE. And then when we talk about Educator Portal and Student Portal, I think you're all familiar with, but I always say Educator Portal is for the adults and the Student Portal is for the students, just as it is. So those are the technology platforms and portals that we'll be working with. Every testlet is administered in a one-on-one situation with a student and a teacher. And we'll get into a little bit more of what those look like here shortly. But as you remember, I mentioned that we have linkage levels, which is a varying skills within each essential element. So for ELA and mathematics, we have 5 linkage levels, and they start with the least to most complex. And you can see here that we start with initial precursor. And that would probably likely be for students who maybe have very limited vocabulary or no vocabulary or speech language. And then it moves up to distal precursor, proximal precursor, target, and successor. We say target is the one that's most closely aligned to the grade level essential element skill. Science is a little different, as you know, and I'll highlight that throughout this presentation. Science has only 3 linkage levels, and you can see here they have an initial, precursor, and target. And again, least to most complex. Oops. Okay. Before I go any further, we have a list of questions that are commonly asked, and we found that it's like it provides you with a lot of good information and some of the basic understanding of the DLM assessment. So one of the most important questions we often get is how many testlets does each student take? So the number of testlets really depend on the grade and subject, but generally we say each student gets 5 to 9 testlets per window, depending on, again, the subject. And then how many items or questions does each testlet have? A testlet usually has 3 to 5 questions or items. How long does it take? It usually takes a student 5 to 15 minutes to complete one single testlet. As you know, all the students have different levels of strengths, and the ability to be able to answer questions just varies from student to student. Who decides, and this is something that's a little unique to DLM, is who decides the linkage levels for the students' testlets. So for ELA and mathematics, the KITE system will automatically recommend a linkage level for each essential element. But with DLM, teachers ultimately get to decide that linkage level for each student. So for science, like I said, science is a little different. So science, it's already decided. The system analyzes and assigns a linkage level for science, but for ELA and mathematics, a linkage level is suggested. And then with those 2 content areas, teachers are able to go in and make adjustments if they need to. Where do teachers assign testlets? It's all done with an educator portal in an area called the Instruction and Assessment Planner. You assign ELA and mathematics testlets there. Again, science is a little different. So science is done through this test management tab, but it's all done with an educator portal and very easy to access. One is the assessment administrator. I think that your assessment dates have already been posted. There's a fall window and a spring window. Again, that is determined state by state, but I think those have been already posted for you. And then the science assessment is only required in the spring window. So fall, you'll do ELA and mathematics. Spring, you'll do ELA, mathematics, and science if that's a student who needs to do all three content areas. And then, like I said, we talk about how science is a little different. So why is it different? It's different because that's self-funded and was developed after our initial DLM grant with ELA and mathematics. So the development still continues. And is being designed on general education standards. So we're currently in the process of updating some science essential elements. So that's why that one runs a little bit differently. So what do the testlets look like? Most of them are multiple choice. They all begin with an engagement activity and are followed by the items or questions. Most of the testlets are computer delivered, meaning that the student can interact with the system or the computer independently with whatever accessibility or allowable supports that are offered for the student. Students who test at a lower linkage level, like maybe the initial or distal precursor linkage level that I had mentioned, and maybe even the proximal, but usually the initial and distal precursor levels, those are often teacher administered. So what that means is that the teacher does the administering and the direct interaction. It includes a script for the teacher to follow what to do and to say when administering that particular testlet to the student. I have a couple examples of what a computer delivered and a teacher administered testlet look like. Now keep in mind, these are PDFs, so it's gonna look really long. It's not gonna I mean, it'll look like what it does on the computer screen, but you have to know that it's a printed version. I'm not gonna go into both of those right now, but I am gonna show you, well, maybe I will. I'll show you what a computer delivered testlet looks like. I'll just go through some of it because they're kind of lengthy, and then you'll be able to look on your own to get a better idea what it looks like. But these are just basically screenshots from the student portal of where to go and where to begin. And you can see, for example, that this is a release testlet, so it's okay to show. We're not showing anything that needs for security reasons. But this is an example of an English language art testlet for grades 11 and 12, and it's a proximal precursor. You can see that it tells you what essential element it is and what nodes are going to be assessed. And we didn't go into nodes, but that's just it breaks it down from the essential elements. So here's like the standard, and then what are we going to do to see if we understand what that standard is. And I'm just gonna kind of go through a little bit to give you just a quick look. So this is gonna be a story about a post office. So it's gonna give you some directions, read the story. After you read the story, you'll read the story again, answer questions, and so on and so forth. So you're gonna go through that process with the computer on the screen. And then when it gets to the end, excuse me, I'm going to scroll really fast. So if this drives you nuts, just close your eyes for 1 second. When you get to the end, it will ask some questions. There'll be a series of questions. This is one particular question. And then the student will interact with it and click on the right choice. And then it'll show you at the end that if there are red boxes, that means that you are not done. But if all the blue dots are filled in, that means you are done. If you're not done, you can go back and answer that question, or you can just leave it not answered, because then that means maybe the student didn't have an answer or doesn't know the answer to that question. And then, whoops, sorry. The computer or the teacher administered one, like I said, that's going to be, you get all the same basic information. You can see this is a mathematics grade 6 initial precursor, because I had mentioned it's usually the beginning or the lower linkage levels that are the ones that are more teacher administered. So it'll tell you to choose begin to start. And I'm just going to give you a quick look. It'll give you exactly the script on what it is that you're going to be doing and how you to minister to the student. And then what you would do on this particular one is you'd be going into student portal and answering the questions of how the student responds to you. So that's just a very quick sample of what those look like. Like I said, they're there for you to view more in detail if you want to later. Okay, this is something I think that most of you are familiar with is Educator Portal. It functions just kind of, it's very basic, and you'll have the role of a teacher, or if you're not a teacher or a DTC, you would go in and click on whatever role it is. It gives you the organization, the assessment program, and in here under Manage Tests, that's where you see the instruction and assessment planner. That is where you will go in and assign your attestlets to the student. And then the test management is where teachers find information about the student's science test list during the spring window. The instruction and assessment planner is only available during an active assessment window since it's ultimately used to assign testlets. However, you are able to access the essential elements and their linkage levels. They are always available on the DLM website. Just a little bit more about Educator Portal. Most teachers will only have access to one district and school, so those required fields may be already populated for you by default, as will your name. Teachers who have teach multiple grades or have multiple students can select one or more at the time of using the drop-down menus. Or you can search to gain access. You can search and it can list all the students that are assigned to you, or you can look up a student by SSID. And this is when you're in the instructional planner looking for your students. So this is oh, shoot, my thing just scrolls really fast. My computer is working faster than I'm talking today, which is unusual. Here's an example of a student activity table, what the instructional planner will look like for you. The teacher in here, Modine Belinda, it's just all made up information to protect any private information, but it gives you an example of what it is going to look like for you in the instructional planner. So each student on a teacher's roster is listed in the student activity table, which provides a snapshot of the student's testing progress during the testing fall and spring windows for ELA and mathematics. So you can see in this case, Belinda has 3 students and they all are in grade 6. So here's student 1, 2, and 3. And it has the grade 6 here. Say she had other students in here. It could be one student here. Maybe she has a 7th grader, and maybe she has an 8th grader. So the student's PII, the student's name and state ID, are going to be provided up on the corner of the activity there. And then the first contact survey button right here. Each student has to have a first contact survey filled out, and it must be completed and submitted before the student can even assess. Once it's completed, this little icon, it'll be blank, but then it'll switch to a check mark once it's completed for the student. If a caution icon will give you an opportunity to click on it and access the first contact survey. Maybe something wasn't completely filled out. But the first contact survey, what that does for each student is it gives the system a lot of information about the student and on how they might respond to ELA and mathematics, how they can interact with their strengths and their weaknesses. So then depending on how the teacher responds to that, the system will then automatically provide a linkage level for each essential element. And then that is when the teacher can override the recommendation of the first of that linkage level the system provided. But the first contact survey, like I said, must be completed before the teacher will have access to the arrows beneath each subject heading. The personal needs and preferences, or the PNP we often call it, is used to denote any accessibility supports a student needs when taking the assessment. Supports provided in the student portal application are activated by the PNP within Educator Portal, and the teacher can conveniently access the PNP profile directly in the planner, as you can see right up here. And that's the same with the first contact survey. You can access it right into the planner. The first contact survey has to be filled out every year. The PNP does not. And sometimes students may never use any of the options within the PNP because there's accessibility supports that they don't need. The assessment is considered complete when the blueprint requirements have been met. The student activity table will indicate the degree to which the student has completed the assessment per window. It also indicates that the teacher has created, if the teacher has created any instructional plans in progress for the student, has assigned any testlets for the student to take in student portal, and the total number of testlets administered to the student. So you can see here, when we're talking about that, this example here, there's that little arrow beneath each subject heading is used to access the test blueprint within the planner of the subject. Except note that assessing science is optional during the fall window. So during the spring window, science is not managed in the planner. So science will have an NA because you have to go in through the test management through there. This is where we're going to get into a lot of detail that might sound really overwhelming, but like I said, I assure you once it'll get easier, and once you get into the system and can work with it, you'll find it's pretty slick. And then the student portal username and password, the student's credentials, you can see up here with the little lock that it's there for you, is provided directly through the planner. A teacher may sign into the student portal on the student's behalf if the student is not able to personally do it. However, educators do not have student portal credentials, so students' credentials must always be used to access the students' assigned testlets in student portal. So like I had described earlier, whether it's computer administered or teacher administered, you still have to use the student's credentials to get into student portal. So you can see, for an example here, the blueprint requirements here for ELA. 2 of the 4 have been met. And then you can see number of plans instruction with instruction in progress are none, but testlets are ready and ready to test would be 2. And the total number of testlets that need to be completed is 5. So you can kind of see how that varies there. So inside the instructional planner, this is what it's going to look like. Here's a snapshot of perhaps what your spring window will look like. Again, you have these icons here. You have a little icon here for fall performance and spring performance. So if you're in the spring window, you can click on the fall performance and you'd be able to get some information about the student's performance in the fall. Again, we have this nice little toolbar here to tell you what all the icons stand for. And this is where, when we talk blueprint requirements within the planner, we have in each section exactly what you need to do to follow the blueprint requirements. So for example, most grades and subjects have 4 sets of blueprint criteria. The number of essential elements and specific criteria vary by grade to grade, by grade and by subject. So in this particular case, the criteria for grade 6, so you can see grade 6, mathematics, claim 1 is to choose 2 essential elements from, to one different conceptual area for this particular area. Claims in conceptual areas are groups of related essential elements which help organize the test blueprints and help teachers plan instruction conceptually rather than skill by skill. For some criteria, multiple conceptual areas will be listed, as is the case here. For others, all essential elements will fall under a single conceptual area. And again, as you become more experienced with the essential elements, a lot of this will start to connect and make a lot more sense. So you can see here that this particular one says says that it's completed and not or completed and mastered. So there will be an icon each time a student completes a testlet in Student Portal. The instruction and assessment planner will indicate whether the student mastered the linkage level assessed along with the date the testlet was taken. So here we go. A student recognizes and represents a many to one ratio. You can see the star here, which means mastery demonstrated, complete mastered, and the date that it happened. On a side note, a bookmark icon is used to denote the system's recommendation. So if you can see right above here, this particular teacher filled out the first contact survey. The system looked at all the information that the teacher inputted, and it recommended that the students start here at this proximal precursor. But you can see that the teacher decided to start at the target level instead. So that's where a lot of teacher choice comes in the system here, where you can either choose to stick with the recommended level, or you can say, you know, I think my student is ready to start here, and that's where we're gonna go. When a Bluebrick requirement has been met for a claim or conceptual area, a check mark up here will appear in the top right corner of the planner for the requirement. In this case, the requirement was to choose and assess 2 essential elements for claim 1 in different conceptual areas. This teacher chose 1 essential element from the conceptual area and one chose an essential element from conceptual areas C1.1 and one from C1.3. So can you exceed the blueprint requirements? Yes, it is acceptable, but it's not expected. I did give you a little sample of the testlet shown early in this presentation. It was assessed. This was the essential element in the linkage level we showed you. So if you were to go back on your own and look at the sample testlets, this is the one that I had showed you earlier. So again, looking at it here, you can see these are the testlets, and this is where the system recommended to start. But in this particular situation, the teacher chose to start here, and then the student completed it and mastered it. Now, if you look down a little bit further here, again, the system for this particular essential element recommended to start here. The teacher did. They completed it, and it was not mastered. So the number of conceptual areas and essential elements vary by grade and subject. Here, the second blueprint criteria says to choose 1 essential element from claim 2. 2 essential elements are offered. They are both from conceptual area C2.2. So you can see up here, it says choose 1 EE from claim 2. And so you have to choose one. So on this particular case, the system recommended the target level. Teacher assessed, and it said that the student completed it but did not master it. And again, the little icon up here comes is check mark because that is complete. Again, this is very similar. It's this particular essential element says choose 1 EE from claim 3. Well, you can see that there is only 1 EE for claim 3. So that's the one you get to choose. Again, the system selected distal precursor for this student, the teacher decided to keep it and assess at that one. And the teacher was not ready to test yet, so they assigned it to that student, and you can see that it is not complete. Oops, again, another sample, sorry. Here, it says to choose 2 EEs from claim 4. So again, here's your options, system recommendation. You can go in and when a teacher has selected the essential element and the linkage level for a student, the linkage level card will display as instruction in progress. This means the teacher is currently working on instruction with the student, but has not yet assigned a testlet for this linkage level. Once a testlet is assigned, it cannot be unassigned. Therefore, an advantage of waiting to assign a testlet is that the teacher can pick a different linkage level if the student demonstrates different skills during the instruction. So something to kind of keep in mind, once you assign it, you can't unassign it. And again, you can see the teacher is instruction in progress. And here again, instruction in progress. And so once they're ready to assign it, then you would hit these little kebabs right here, and then it would turn into this little blue thing saying there is a testlet assigned and it's waiting for the student in student portal. One kind of unique thing to DLM alternate assessments, and kind of where it gets its name from, the learning maps based approach to its design, teachers have access to what we call mini maps for each essential element. These mini maps show all the skills related to an essential element, including the skills that align to the linkage levels and any additional skills a student might need to learn to reach at a higher level. With the DLM program does not provide or endorse a package curriculum, the mini maps are certainly a key to instructional guides to help the teachers consider their instructional plans for individual students and their class as a whole. So here's an example of an essential element, what it would look like if you were to hit these or click on the kebab, because each kebab menu, it shows a linkage level card in the instruction and assessment planner, which is selected to change the status of a linkage level for a student. So this particular one, it says instruction in progress. You click on the kebab, you can change it to assign a testlet. If you are doing some instruction and you aren't ready to assign it, or you might think you want to change a linkage level, there's the option of instruction, do not assign, instruction complete, do not assign a testlet. And then you can see here with each area, you get a little PDF, and that would be the mini map that's provided to you that you can use. And I'm going to show you an example of a mini map. I think these are probably one of the most coolest things ever to be helpful as just a teaching tool when you're designing your lessons. So this is mathematics, grade 6, expressions and equations. So you can see what the DLM essential element is. And then you can see where it's connected to grade 6 grade level standards. And then down below, this is what I think is pretty neat and helpful, is it breaks it down per linkage level and then gives you an idea what's expected at each one of those linkage levels. So really a nice tool, I think, for instructional planning, for just lots of different neat things that you can do with it. I could probably talk a long time on this, but I am not going to. We'll save that for another time of what we can really do and how we can use these in our classroom for instruction. So we're kind of at the final end where I want to give you some time for some questions. I've talked really fast and showed you a lot of information, but just some lingering questions that we often get. So I'm going to go through those real quickly. So like, do DLM testlets require additional materials? If so, are they provided? Some actually do require some materials, but we have materials but the materials are not provided to you. Each testlet, you will get a testlet information page, kind of where you find the mini map PDF where I showed you. For the test, each test administrator will have access to that ahead of time, which lists the materials and explains how they'll be used and provides suggestions for substitutions. We do have materials that are typically common to schools that are usually used, and resources that you can look at for materials lists. It's no way expected that you go out and purchase a whole bunch of materials, because like I said, most of the materials are just natural materials you would regularly have in your classroom and that are familiar to the student. Does the teacher have to make the same selection in the spring window that were made in the fall? So the answer to that is no. The blueprint criteria remain the same, but the teacher can choose to make different selections if desired from fall to spring. Can a teacher keep reassessing the student on an essential element linkage level until the student masters it? So that's a no and yes question. The supply of testlets per linkage level is limited, but a student can be reassessed at the same linkage level for an essential element if there are additional testlets available. And then how is it scored? DLM scoring is based on the number of skills a student has mastered across all testlets they took. So higher linkage levels give students opportunities to master more skills. So our assessment is scored a little differently than what you might have experienced with standards assessments, but we're really looking at the skills mastered across testlets for each student. And that is the end of our lingering questions. I talked probably about 6 minutes longer than I was planning on to, but I welcome and open it up to questions. I think like if you want to take yourself off mute and off video, you can do that. Or if you want to put it in the chat, I've been having some of my friends watch the chat for questions. So yeah, I'll leave it there. What would you guys all like to ask?
Tammy, I'm just going to speak to a few that we answered in the chat
Oh,
already.
sure.
The grade levels that will be taking DLM are the same grade levels that took our alt assessments in the past. So for math and ELA, that's grade 3 through 8 and 11. And then for science, that's 5, 8, and 11. Andrea had a great question about access to DLM through Kite. It is not available yet. We are working on integrating everything. So we're hoping to get that integration done by late summer. And then as soon as that happens, we will enter our system test coordinators and they can add those additional user roles. So you won't see anything yet, but system test coordinators will be notified when they have access. There's also a question about test administrative training. And Tammy, I think we have a question for you in that one. There is an annual training. The first training that everyone will take this year is 4 modules. And Tammy, time frame for that first training is about how long?
It's about 2.5 hours. It's based on a similar like RISE module presentation. You can do it all on your own. You can do it all at once, or you can do it in segments, but it's about 2.5 hours.
Perfect. And then after that, each subsequent year is just 1 module of training once you've passed that.
Correct.
And then one question that came up from that, Tammy, was, is there a way for at the district level to see who has completed training and who has not completed training, like an extract for that?
Yep, district level users will have access to, we didn't get into all the extracts that are available, but that is one that will be available that will offer people to know who has completed and who has not completed the training.
Perfect. Another question that came up is with our previous alternate assessments, we did have a early stopping rule for students who did not provide a response. Is there an option to mark if a student does not provide a response to like a testlet?
Yeah, so depending on the testlet and the linkage level, whether it's computer administered or teacher administered, some often in the teacher administered testlets, there will be a choice where there's no indication or no response by the student. But either way, if a student doesn't respond or doesn't offer an answer, you can leave it as blank and that's considered a no response and evaluated accordingly.
Perfect. And then I saw another question about ELA and math are fall and spring, and science is still in the spring. Yes,
Yes.
for that one. And you will notice that the spring window is much different than our traditional spring window in that it starts, I believe, in February and it goes until May. So it is a very long spring window to be able to administer during that time. So much different than our previous alternate testing windows. And then Elizabeth, I see you have a hand up.
Yeah, sorry if you answered this. Is there a place where you can access all of the mini maps, like throughout the year, not just during the testing? Is there a place where all of those, even across all grade levels, or even for your own administration grades?
I have to see if they're posted on our website. Good
I'm just
question.
thinking for instructional planning, like
Yeah.
across time.
Are you looking for the complete list?
Yes,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
sorry.
posted. Yeah, it's
Thank
posted
you.
here. I can put the link in and people
Okay,
can
thank
grab
you.
it.
There you go.
And if you tab over for what I gave you was to ELA, then you can go to math and to science.
And then Tammy, I see a question about what would it look like if a student does not have a valid response method?
I guess that's dependent per student. I mean, if a student is not answering, not responding, not engaging, that's where some of the teacher judgment has to come in. If it's teacher administered, if you look at the sample test it'll show you the options a teacher can respond, like maybe a student's just doing, for example, eye gaze, and the eye gaze towards the correct response. There's so many different variables in that situation, and the teachers know the student best. So if they're not responding at all, like I said earlier, you can choose just not to even answer the question and then leave a no, that's considered no response. Or in the teacher delivered ones, if there is a option to click on no response, you can do that as well. There's no time limit on it. One thing with our assessment, I mean, we understand the uniqueness of students with significant cognitive disabilities, and that is one of our things is we just don't want to put time limits on any student to have to answer under conditions in which they're not normally instructed to or respond to. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and to clarify, there is no early stopping rule in MSAA. There's not an early stopping rule. You would try to administer those testlets. And then Andrea, I saw your question. So unlike math that has to be scheduled before the window opens, Tammy, correct me if I'm wrong, but when the window is open, you can go in and assign those tests at any time during an open window, correct?
Yep, yep. The window has to be open before you can get in the instructional planner to go in and start completing instruction and signing testlets. That's student by student, teacher by teacher basis, and how you want to plan your time. But the thing to remember with that is, like I had said earlier, and we'll make sure we repeat a lot of this closer to that time frame. But once you assign a testlet, you can't unassign it. So you're going to have to administer that one. So just keep that in mind.
Also, a point here is that you have to have successfully passed your required test administrator training before you can access the assessment.
Then I see a question in the chat. In the test last year, we had to make our own charts and math for the students to mark. Is this test the same?
Nope. It's all electronic. Like I had mentioned, and I briefly touched on the test information page where when you go into the planner and you go to those kebabs, there'll be a PDF, and we call them tips because it basically gives you tips. When you click on that page, it'll tell you what resources you might need. It'll tell you about substitutions, all the kinds of things that might be helpful for you to plan, and a teacher can access that prior to administering the testlet. So if there's something you need, you'd know in advance, but you will not have to make anything on your own. Science, you might have, no, not even, I was gonna say you can print out materials if that's something that the student requires to see something printed. That's an accessibility feature, but it's not required.
And then Laura, I see that you asked about a user guide. We actually have within the DLM website, the Montana page is up and already has some resources populated. So I will drop the chat to that, or the link to that in the chat now. So that's a great page to bookmark as we have more resources that come up throughout the summer. Those will be added, but it has some of our blueprints already. So that's where you can start exploring some of those resources.
One thing also, again, we didn't talk a lot about the required test administrator training, but some of the information I went over today, when the required test administrator training opens in the fall, and the 4 modules you go through will really take you kind of step by step through what it is that you need to do. So that will be really helpful to everyone as well. So.
Elizabeth, did you have another question?
Sorry, I don't seem to be able to get into the chat. You said it was 1-to-1 administration. Is that also true with the computerized level? Like, can you have multiple kids taking the computerized version at once? Kind of like the
I really
science,
want to
alt
defer
science.
to Cedar on that
Okay.
one. I mean, every state has, different policies and rules. I mean, obviously you can't have students looking at each other's computers. It can be, I mean, you can have a few students in the room if they're separated and they're not distracting each other, all those kind of basic, like privacy, logistical kinds of things when you're assessing. And if they're independent with the system. I'm gonna defer that to
No,
you
Tammy,
all.
you're spot on. As long as that student is not being like, there's nothing else in that classroom experience that's interfering with that assessment or could give that child any sort of advantage or disadvantage from other things that are going on.
We just need to keep in mind that the information on the computer screen is all secure information. Like even that tips page that I talked about. Sometimes teachers or administrators like to print it out, which is perfectly acceptable. But again, that's a secure testing material. So it's you have to shred it and dispose of it appropriately. So, I mean, if you think about it in that perspective of everything needs to be secure and treated as that, however you set up your environment to make sure you honor that, for us is what we expect.
And then I saw the question about 1 or 2 days like the previous tests. These tests take about 5 to 15 minutes. So much shorter in time, and these are spread out throughout that testing window. So like I said, this is one of the big reasons why we wanted to go to this model, because one of the things we heard about our previous model is the amount of testing, especially for this population of kids, was a lot. So much smaller bite-sized pieces spread out throughout the year. And then I also see the question about IEPs and the need for the document to be amended. We will talk about that, I think, a little bit, especially due to accommodations. We are able to see if the student is eligible for an alternate test. So as far as like the accommodations, we will do a similar process as we did when we transitioned from Smarter Balance to MAST in terms of accommodations. And so this year there'll definitely be that transition period. But if a student was taking the alternate assessment last year and is eligible, they will be taking DLM this year unless their eligibility changes.
I know that many of you are going on summer break. However, I am going to put a little advertisement out, I guess, if you want to call it that. Like Cedar put the link to the Montana specific page in there. There's a lot of good information on there. You could probably, there's like tons of instructional PD resources for you, just lots of good information. So I think just if you were not to think about this for the rest of the summer, just to take some time to become familiar with the website and kind of know what's hanging out there, it would be really helpful to you. And then the other thing, little hint I'll give you is like all the essential elements are posted. Susan, my colleague, posted the link to the blueprints and mini maps in there. If you're interested in looking at, specific grades or getting familiar with that, that's also very helpful for you. Because really, honestly, the logistics of working within the computer and setting things up, that's probably maybe the easiest part of it, is just really being familiar of knowing what you're looking at in terms of the alternate achievement standards or the essential elements in the instruction. Yeah, so those are just helpful tidbits that I think could be useful for you as you're thinking about it or starting school in the fall.
Perfect. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions. I know that many may come up this summer. We are always here to help if questions come up. The assessment team does work all summer. So if anything comes up, I will drop our phone number in the chat. Feel free to give us a call. Like I said, we will be continuously working through development of resources and making sure that everything's ready to go this fall. But we are grateful for our DLM team to be here to help present. Super grateful to our field to be here. Especially late on a very beautiful June afternoon, but we're really excited for this transition. And feel free to reach out with any questions that come up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.